Welcome to the realm of the unexplained, courtesy of Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us as we venture into the mysterious and the bizarre. We guarantee an immersive experience that'll challenge your perception of reality. Old people's home turned haunted house. I moved into a house with my boyfriend and 3 other people, and for 2 weeks it was just my boyfriend and I. I've lived in quite a few houses in multiple countries, so I know what new house noises sound like, even though I've always kind of believed in ghosts. My boyfriend doesn't. When it was just the 2 of us, I would hear someone walking up and down the upstairs hallway. I just presumed it was my new house noises, until my boyfriend, who doesn't believe in ghosts, didn't want to go up to my room because of the footsteps. Still hates going upstairs. We jokingly told our other roommates in a group chat, and it turns out that this house used to be a home for mentally and physically disabled old people. So good chance that somebody would just drop one day. The entire house is on a slant, and because my bedroom is at the end of the upstairs hall, it'll constantly swing open and won't stay shut, unless it's like really pushed shut. So I never bother to close it since it'll just open anyway. But I noticed that it started closing on its own, which is weird because the slant of the house has a door sort of permanently open unless I slam it shut closed, which I never do. I can hear footsteps go to my room, and then I go up and the doors push shut. After everybody moved in, my roommate and I were both stood at the bottom of the stairs talking when we heard someone running down the stairs. But when the noise got to the bottom, there was no one there. Another night everybody was passed out and my roommate heard footsteps going to the bathroom. Pretty normal. But then she saw the lights turn on and off. Then no footsteps leaving. More recently I was going up to bed well after everybody else was asleep, and a door to the storage closet was opening and closing. It squeaks when it moves. This is while I was walking up the stairs. When I got to the top, it stopped, shut itself, and then as soon as I rounded the corner into my room, it was opening and closing every once in a while for hours, which it shouldn't be doing. When you think about the way the house slants, it should stay shut. It has to be held open while we want it open. And the weirdest part of it all is this. It all started happening when we covered this creepy photo of Jesus that stares into your soul when you eat at the kitchen counter. Like, I have nothing against Jesus, but goddamn, that photo was creepy. I just wanted to eat without getting judged by the big man himself. My roommate and I have a rule not to touch the photo. My boyfriend still hates it upstairs, because he doesn't want to believe in ghosts, and it makes him uneasy when he's up there. Working at a haunted middle school. So a little backstory. I'm a part-time custodian for the town that I live in, and only work when I'm needed. I've pretty much worked every school in the district, including the middle school that I attend. It's a fairly old school built in the early 60s, and it's actually being torn down in about a year to make room for the new middle school that will be replacing it. I love that school. Never want to see it, but it's kind of a dump. But every time I get the opportunity to go back and work there again, I always accept. I've always been a firm believer in ghosts and have a handful of experiences, but I'd never experienced anything at that building before, until last winter. I was working a 3-night stint at the old middle school on the 2nd floor from about 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. Quite frankly, I didn't need 7 hours to go about the nightly routine of cleaning, and I was fine with that. On the first night, I went about my business, knowing that I could pace myself, but was still flying through my work. I'm not overly social, but when I work night shifts, I actually like them better because most people are gone by 5 p.m., and I can just have my headphones in and listen to music and podcasts. It was probably about 5 p.m. when I was sweeping classroom floors in the science wing. All the doors were shut and locked, which is mandatory in the science wing. The lights were shut off in the rooms, meaning that all the teachers had gone home for the night. Now, this detail is important. I have a system when it comes to cleaning rooms, and it's very simple. When I've done everything that needs to be done in a room, I shut the lights off in that room. But when I know that I have to go back into a room for whatever reason, whether it be a stain on the floor that needs to be mopped or a rug that needs to be vacuumed, I leave the lights on in that room as a reminder to go back in at some point. There was one room in that wing that needed a wet mop pretty badly, so I left the lights on and the door opened. I figured when I was cleaning the bathroom floors in that wing later on, I would make a stop in that room and give it a quick mop. At this point, it was probably around 7 p.m., and I've just finished taking a break with my coworker Jeff, who works on the first floor. I go upstairs to my closet and gather my bathroom cleaning supplies. About 30 minutes later, I make my way back to the science wing to clean the bathrooms and the classroom floor. When I get down to the classroom, I notice that not only is the door shut with the lights off, but the door's locked. Now, I know that this wasn't me. I never close the classroom doors until I go around to shut the hallway lights off at the end of the night, so just in case I need to go back into a room. I'm also positive that no teachers were left in the building. I unlocked the door and the lights are flipped in the off position, so I flipped them back on. I then immediately ran downstairs to ask Jeff if he had been in the science wing at all in the last hour or so, and he said no. I then asked if there had been any teacher meetings in the main office or teacher's lounge. The answer was also no. I told him what was happening. He wasn't surprised at all, saying that he thinks that the building is haunted. We talked for another minute or two. I went back upstairs to the classroom, and what do you know? The lights are off again. I always try to debunk every experience that I have, but I cannot for the life of me think of anything that would have caused these things to happen. It was the middle of December, and the building was always cold there, so no windows open, and I made sure of that. I have no explanation for, the doors locking on their own, and I walk around the entire upstairs looking in every classroom trying to find any sign that some teachers could have still been in the building, but I found nothing. I went back to mop the classroom floor and finished the rest of my work for the night. Night 2 was uneventful, but night 3 was the most eventful in my opinion. The whole night I had a feeling of someone watching me, and not your normal feeling of being watched, but also if I was being followed, especially once all the faculty and students were gone. One could normally chalk this up to paranoia, but this feeling only got worse once I thought I heard footsteps around me a few times. Not heavy footsteps. They were more like a light shuffling. I ended up back at the science wing bathrooms. Now these bathrooms are faculty only, and the doors are always shut. They both open just by simply pushing the door. No knobs or levers to turn, but the women's room on the left doesn't normally shut all the way. It stays propped open on its own by about half an inch unless you pull it closed all the way. I always start with the men's room on the right. I go in and out of the boys' room a few times to grab things off my cart. At one point, I open the boys' room door and take 2 or 3 steps in when suddenly the door to the girls' room slams shut. It wasn't just a normal slam. This was loud to the point where I jumped, and I don't scare easy. I go back into the hall and the door's shut. I open the door to the girls' room, certain that nobody's actually in there, but just to be safe, I do my normal, "Hello? Anyone in there?" Custodial needs to come in. With the door just cracked open and no response. I open the door fully and both stalls are open and there's no one inside. I lean back into the hallway and shout for Jeff, thinking he somehow pulled a prank on me, slamming the door, then running away into a nearby classroom. But then it occurred to me, these bathrooms are pretty far removed from any classrooms in both directions. If it was Jeff or a kid playing a prank, I would have seen them, A few seconds after shouting for whoever may have been listening, I swear I heard faint whispers. The problem was I couldn't tell what direction they came from. It was like they were all around me. I asked them to speak up and they suddenly went silent. I must have spent 10 minutes playing with that door trying to figure out what could have caused it to slam so hard. There's no windows that could have blown it shut, and the only vent in the room is on the other side of the room. It does not blow hard enough to move the door with that kind of force, if at all. So I quickly finished my work in the bathrooms, swept the hallway floor so I could finish up for the night. Once I was finished, I took one final walk around to shut off any classroom lights and lock any doors that may have been left on or open, as well as shut off the hallway lights. While doing this, I made sure that I didn't have my headphones in. If something wanted to get my attention, I was going to make sure that they got it. Nothing happened while I made my final rounds upstairs, so I went downstairs to find Jeff. I asked him about the bathroom doors slamming, and where he was around that time. He told me he was in the 6th grade classrooms by the kitchen, which is on the 1st floor and on the opposite side of the building. He also said that he's never experienced that bathroom door do anything weird before, but then again, he had never worked the upstairs wings before. I walked with Jeff talking to him about random stuff as he went around shutting off his lights. It's probably around 9:15 p.m. at this point. Yes, we were a little bit late at this point, but we didn't really mind. As we made our way down near the music wing, something urged me to look back down the hall from which we came, so I did just that. I turned to look, and I still get chills and a smile like a madman when I think about what I saw. I saw a dark gray transparent figure shaped like a person walking from left to right down the hall toward the gym. I immediately started running down the hall to try to see it again, but played it off to Jeff like I thought I saw a real person, was going to direct them out of the building, but I know what I saw. There were no people in the building. There were no basketball practices, no extracurriculars going that late. There should have been absolutely no one else in the building at all. I turn the corner and I don't see anyone. I check all the bathrooms and there's no one. I checked further down the hall around the corner and there was also no one. I looked outside to the front plaza. There wasn't a soul. No people, no cars, nothing. At this point, I honestly got teary-eyed, but not because I was upset or scared, but because I was happy. To that point in my life, those are the most intense experiences I've ever had. I firmly believe that someone was trying to contact me over those 3 days. Jeff and I finished up and went home. I've since been back to that school a handful of times, but unfortunately, I've not had any true great experiences like I did those 3 nights, other than the shadows that we all sometimes see in the corners of our eyes. But who really knows for sure if those are spirits? There was nothing like the walking figure that I saw, so I chalked them up to my mind playing tricks on me, but like I said, who can be sure? The woman who normally works the upstairs wings of that school doesn't believe my stories. She's worked there for 11 years, says that she's never experienced anything in the building before, but she's also one of the most closed-minded people I've ever met. She doesn't believe in ghosts and won't even ponder the idea of aliens or life outside our planet. She says that I only saw what I wanted to see and experienced what I wanted to experience, but quite frankly, I think that's bullshit. My theory is that since I was clearly interested in what the spirit or spirits were doing, given that I would spend significant amounts of time trying to debunk my experiences, they tried to keep my attention almost like they were starved for attention altogether. I also think it's possible that since I was in middle school, the spirits or spirits may be that of middle school-aged kids. They were doing juvenile things just to mess with me, like shutting me out of the rooms and scaring me by slamming the door. And then when I called for the voices I was hearing, and they would just go silent like students sometimes do when they get yelled at for talking during a test. It's all theory, but I think those ideas make sense, and I hope that they make sense to whoever may be reading this. Sorta. I know these aren't the scariest encounters, but they are very near and dear to me. Like I said, I've always believed in ghosts, and have had some smaller encounters with what I believe were ghosts before, but up to that point in my life, they were the most intense encounters I've ever had. I've had some more encounters recently, some at another school that I believe is haunted. I may post them here at some point, but for now, I'll leave it here. I hope some people took the time to read this and enjoyed it. It would mean the world to me if you did, and if some of you did enjoy reading it, then I'll try to write out some more for some of my other more recent encounters. Also, if you've had any similar experiences, I would love to hear them, so feel free to leave comments with similar encounters. Haunted building. I'm a manager working in an older building with quirks. Some of my team members believe the building is haunted. And whenever something unexplained occurs, we tongue-in-cheek blame the ghost. We have a loose policy that no one is to be in the building alone. But there's no repercussions for breaking it. So management sometimes stays late to help with labor costs, or the closer calls out. Or I'm not going to make a kid who has an exam in the morning stick around while I wrap up the paperwork. We also have a motion-activated alarm system, and when there's only one person in the building, it sometimes spits out a motion-detected error when that person tries to set the alarm. It starts at the back door, but with each code entry, it detects motion in a different location. When it happened to me, I went through the building to make sure it was unoccupied. And when I stopped to get a drink on the way out, I caught a glimpse of a shadow squirming up toward the ceiling to hide on top of the soda machine. At least, it sort of looked that way. I chalked it up to headlights from a vehicle passing by. We're on the main street after all. Still, I locked up quickly and bolted for my car. A few months down the road, I get a call from a new manager, and she says, "The alarm won't set." I ask her to put in the code and tell me what the screen says. And sure enough, motion detected, back door. She goes back to lock it, thinks maybe she saw someone in one of the cameras. Go back up in front, and thankfully, the alarm sets and she leaves. A few days later, on a whim, I check the cameras myself. I don't see a person, but during the phone call, one of the cameras near the alarm rapidly fogs up and then clears. It looks like somebody blew smoke over the camera lens, but it shows up in a second and vanishes just as quick. And on the right side of the image, there's a large black cloud. Yeah, I paused the screen and took a picture, but honestly, it doesn't look like anything that can't be explained, or that couldn't be done up in Photoshop. I don't know that we're working in a haunted building. I've worked in a few buildings where the staff thought ghosts were playing around, and I've never actually seen anything that couldn't be dismissed. And this falls into that same category. Still, sharing it because it's creepy enough to, when I'm in the building alone, I get someone on the phone to chat while I finish up. Ask Reddit. My then girlfriend was adamant her house was haunted by her past life lover. She was big on Anne Rice, so I never took it too seriously and was quick to dismiss her stories with casual explanations. One day her parents were out. We were dining with her kid's sister, just the three of us. Suddenly, a loud bang in the wall directly behind me. That wall led to a room in her house. Another bang, and another. The sound was moving along the wall. Then the sound of stuff breaking. I walked to the room quick. The room was torn apart. stuff all over the place. And as I turned on more lights, I noticed the path of destruction continued along the hall, leading to another room. The kid's sister had my leg in a vice grip. "Don't go," she cried. My girlfriend was pulling my arm. I've been through a lot in my life, including waking up without a limb with no recollection of what happened. To this day, I don't think I was ever scared as that day, both of them crying for me not to go. I had to. I just had to. I literally dragged my leg across the hall until eventually the kid let go and joined her sister. My legs were trembling as I was gathering my guts to turn the light on in the room, and when I did, her cat was there, with a bag on her head. No one remembered that they had a cat in the heat of the moment, but I was always so full of myself, full of my clinical and logical thinking. It went to show that when shit hits the fan, sometimes you just react. You get so pulled by all the ambience that you just forget to apply logic to the whole thing. For a few minutes there, I believed I was about to see a ghost. Woken to a disembodied voice in my room. A few years ago, we lived in this old house for over 10 years. It was almost a century old. I always had creepy vibes about it. Not all the time, but from time to time I'd feel like I was being watched. My young daughter at the time started having night terrors. She seemed to be experiencing some anxiety as well, and didn't like the closet in her room as it had attic access. For a while, we just figured it was the typical boogeyman stuff kids are afraid of. One night I heard footsteps on the stairs, called out, asked why she was out of bed. No answer. It was an old house with creaky stairs, so there was no mistaking the sound. No one else was home. I called out again. No answer. So I went upstairs and she was sound asleep. It seemed she started to call for me more and more at night. At that time, I was experiencing mobility issues, so I actually ended up buying a small TV for my bedroom upstairs. I would just retire there for the evening to be closer to her and save me the multiple trips up the stairs. I'm not particularly afraid of ghosts, but I know how scary it must have been for a little kid, though most of what would scare her at the time seemed explainable. Then one night, lying in bed and trying to fall asleep, I caught a glimpse of my bedroom door open about 12 inches. It freaked me out, but as you do, you talk yourself out of these things and begin to wonder if it's all just, your eyes playing tricks on you. Until one night, I was awoken by what I thought was my husband sitting down in bed right next to me. He'd been out with friends, and I thought he was leaning in to give me a kiss goodnight as I sensed the approach to my face, but I heard the most frightening whisper I've ever heard. "Get out!" There was no mistaking. It wasn't my husband. I sprung up and there was no one there. My husband wasn't even home yet. After quite some time, I finally fell asleep with the lights on and the door closed shut. I haven't told many that story, but it was my experience. I had a friend that had psychic abilities her whole life, but was just learning to accept and utilize them. One day after my youngest, about 2 at the time, started telling me about a little boy she was playing with that Mommy couldn't see. I finally asked my friend if I should be afraid of what was going on in my home. She told me that she sensed 3 people. A tall, thin, dark-skinned male with a top hat and Victorian-type garb. An equally slender, light-skinned woman in a long dress, also seemingly Victorian. And a little boy with dark brown locks, wearing overalls that seemed to be about 3 to 4 years of age. She said she didn't sense that they were a danger, but attached to the land and not the house. Which made sense since we were one of the only 3 owners and the house didn't date to Victorian times. It especially freaked me out since upon trying to get some details about the little boy, my daughter did say that he had brown hair, curly like hers, and was little like her. I was flabbergasted. I did a sage cleanse and one day spoke them aloud and simply asked the spirits to leave, to go to the light if they saw it, and that they were upsetting my family. I expressed that it was my home and they were no longer welcome there. Not long after, there were no more weird happenings and my youngest wondered where her friend went. Demonic or what? This happened about a year ago, and it absolutely terrified me. Before I get into this, I'll give some insight. I'm a Wiccan and have Native American and Norse ancestors, and have always been able to sense spirits, and could see them when I was younger. My fiancé, we'll call him M. He's like me, but he can still see spirits. We have 2 young kids, the oldest, A, from his first marriage, and the youngest, D, from my previous relationship. So in July of 2022, me and my fiancé had went to pick up D, who was 10 months at the time, from his dad. We had A with us because he was spending the week with us. This is important. On our way back from picking D up, we decided to take a scenic route because, why not? Well, about 45 minutes in, we came into this small town. And when I say small, I mean like maybe 100 people lived there. We were coming up past an old abandoned school where there was a really sharp turn, maybe a quarter of a mile up. It was nice enough out, and we had our windows down, and as soon as we got past the school, M started rolling up the windows and driving a bit faster, but didn't say anything. When I went to ask him why he was rolling up the windows, he didn't say anything and just pointed for me to look out the side mirror. When I looked, I saw a large black figure chasing us. Like I said at the beginning, I normally don't see these types of things, I just sense them, so I was freaked out about it. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and I got this feeling that I needed to put it on, so I did, and then I felt another presence, and that I knew immediately it was my brother who had passed a few years back. Him being there helped ground me to stay calm. I was still anxious. I assumed once we got past the curve that the things maybe stopped following us, but boy was I wrong. It continued to follow us for about another 20 miles until we both saw a white orb shoot across the road at it, and it looked like it tackled it to the ground. When we were probably about 15 minutes from our house, A, out of nowhere, just said that he was scared because something had been chasing us, but it had just disappeared. Neither M nor I said anything out loud about it either. It was definitely one of my most terrifying experiences with the paranormal, but I'm still unsure as to what it was, since, it was able to follow as far as it did. If anyone has any idea on what it could have been, or maybe a reason it followed us for so long, I definitely appreciate it. Ask Reddit. For those interested, here's my story. My girlfriend and I went on a 14-mile backpacking trip to a beautiful and remote mountain lake. We arrived to the site at sunset and rapidly set up our camp. We were exhausted, but everything was good. First night sleeping there, nothing unordinary. The second night, however, the That's what they wrote. Don't yell at me. Let me tell you guys about the second night. My girl and I had settled, and our tent was there for the night. We had a lantern hanging up inside the tent for light. We were just chilling and talking. Suddenly, we hear distinct bipedal footsteps approach the tent. Whatever, I mean, other people do hike, but so whatever. It's not too strange, I guess. We were a little weirded out, but we didn't bother looking out at that point just yet. Then it gets freaky, and it continues walking right up to the tent. And this time we're like, okay, what the fuck? Then we pause, then go silent. We're just listening. A short time passes, we forget about it. Now once more we hear footsteps approaching, but this time they're much faster. Sounds like it's running to the tent. I had a rifle, so I grabbed it and got it ready. My girl had a knife. We no shit braced for whoever this thing was. We did not feel like it was an animal. Keep that in mind. But, as you all probably guessed, nothing happened. It ran at the tent. The sound vanished. We got out because we were done being fucked with, and were ready to fight if need be. We look around with flashlights and nothing. No sign of anything or anyone. It was the most raw adrenaline rush I've ever gotten while camping or hiking. Still freaks us out to this day when we talk about it. I had an evil entity in our home that was attached to a gift I received. When I started dating my wife, I was 15. Her stepdad gave me this rock that had a dragon carved into it. It was cool, actually, and it was heavy. I took it home and placed it on my room inside my entertainment center. As time went by, it became difficult to get a good night's sleep. I would wake up constantly having trouble getting back to sleep. During the same time, I would have increasingly suicidal thoughts. I started withdrawing myself from my family. One day I was watching my small nephew, and I was sitting outside on the phone. I was peering through the window to keep an eye on my nephew who was sleeping on the couch. This is when all of a sudden a small dark shadow about 4 feet tall went from one room into my room. I immediately got chills. I was afraid to go back inside. Another time I was sleeping in my room and I woke up to this, I guess a shadow was standing over me. I couldn't move. I couldn't say anything. The moment I started praying, it descended into my bed and I was able to move again. I got up and ran out of the room and I fell asleep on the couch. One day I was watching a program about hauntings. They had mentioned how a demon attached to a doll. That's when it clicked on me. Everything started happening once I got that rock dragon from my girlfriend's stepdad. I opened my entertainment center and it was gone. I looked everywhere for it and just never found it again. But since it disappeared, everything stopped. I was myself again, and no more shadow people or night terrors. Just sleep paralysis or a spirit. So I've been having quite a few nights where I'll wake up in a panic with my whole body buzzing in a super loud static noise. I'm assuming it's some type of intense sleep paralysis that I'm having, though it only lasts a few seconds. It's always after a dream where I feel a very negative presence near me, and I know when I look at them I'll be shocked awake. It really does feel like I'm being shocked. The first time this happened was last winter, but it was a lot different than others. I was sleeping over at my boyfriend's place and I woke up at the same point to move to the guest room. His room feels like an oven. I tapped him to let him know. but I don't think he really processed what I was saying while half asleep. Now I'm in the air-conditioned room on a big bed, much comfier. I drift off to sleep. Then at around 4 a.m., my eyes kind of just open themselves. My whole body is tingly and numb, and I stare at the wall in front of me. I hear the door behind me squeak open, a very loud, creaky door in dire need of some WD-40. Then close again. Some footsteps walking forward, and then my boyfriend's voice saying, "I can't believe it. You were here this whole time. I can't do this. The voice gradually got quieter as it spoke. When I turned around, there was an empty room. No boyfriend, no voice, nothing. Everything I heard was undeniable. Yet none of it happened. After that, I went right back to sleep because I was too tired to be bothered. The next morning, I asked my boyfriend if he went to the guest room that night. He told me he slept through the whole night in his room. I told him what happened. He told me that there's lower energy beings that can sometimes make contact with us higher energy beings. At least when we're at a lower vibration. They almost match theirs. He also said that what was said was probably from a fear I had in my head, because that's what they understand the most. And I did have a sort of irrational fear that he would be upset I went to sleep in another room. I don't know if any of that stuff is true or if it was just some kind of one-time hallucination that I had. I also didn't feel any real fear that night, and the presence I felt wasn't negative. Ask Reddit. Not my story, but my friend was at camp with me. We were in the same cabin. We all stayed up until we got tired and went to sleep. My friend, let's call him Chandler, stole some instant coffee packets from the kitchen, and we had them in water at night. Chandler didn't have a good caffeine tolerance, so he just stayed up a bit. All of us went to sleep. I asked him what he was going to do, and he said he bought a novel and that he was going to read it until he fell asleep. So it's about 1 a.m. and we're all peacefully sleeping, and then we hear the biggest scream. Chandler was crying. He was shaking in his sleeping bag, and everyone in our cabin came over to see what was wrong, to help him out. He was screaming really loudly, and if that didn't wake up other cabins and teachers, then his loud crying after did. Soon all of the teachers were inside our cabin. I had to stay on my bunk bed to not be squashed. Chandler told us that he saw a ghost wandering around our cabin. He said he also heard the wind breeze while the ghost was moving. Another guy in my cabin backed him up by just saying he also heard that. Chandler was sent home, and everybody continued the camp. However, it felt really weird. I talked to him a lot when we got home, and he told me more details. I find it really weird because Chandler's the most honest guy I know, and he seemed really traumatized. I was considering if it was the effect of the coffee, but the night before he had it as well, and didn't see or didn't have hallucinations. Plus, he was a regular drinker and he loved the taste even though it made him stay up. This story shakes me to this day. Ghost in my house. I live with my sister, her husband, and 2 kids. The 2 kids are 1 and 2, so you have to be very quiet when they're sleeping. I was working night shift for a while, and at about 2 or 3 I'd come home for lunch. One night I had come home, I'm about to leave, everyone's asleep. I'm in the kitchen smoking, and like completely hacking up a lung, and I hear a voice clear as day whisper, "Shut up!" It was back to back about 3 times. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." It was a man's voice, so I assumed it was my brother-in-law telling me I needed to be quiet. And since I was about to leave anyways, I just got my stuff and left. I did note that when it happened, I was surprised. I was especially surprised that I couldn't hear his door open, as it's usually pretty loud. I asked him about it the next day, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I could tell he was serious and not messing with me. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a crash in the living room from my bedroom. I see a painting has fallen off the wall and landed about 6+ feet away from where it was hung. Also, one of the owners of the house died in the living room. He was an old man, and to be honest, I think he sleeps in the recliner and wants me to shut up at night. I'm an extremely paranoid person who gets creeped out really easily. Didn't feel at all scared. I don't think he's mean or anything. I think he's just old and cranky and is like, can't even get some goddamn sleep when I'm dead. Like, I completely get that. Appalachia haunting and pets are noticing. What do I do? I've been visiting my grandpa in Virginia to care for him. I grew up going to this house every month for my childhood. It's in Ivanhoe, Virginia, in Appalachia. It's an abandoned mining town, and growing up in this house built in 1853, I've always noticed things that were out of the ordinary. For example, the room I'd always stay in faced the front porch, windows, and it had rocking chairs. One night I woke up to use the restroom. I looked out the window. I saw a black shadow figure sitting in the rocking chair. It was rocking back and forth with long, flowy hair. I heard a woman's humming. I ran back under the covers and wrapped my head in blankets, along with my toes, until I could sleep. This wasn't the first time I've noticed that figure. Flashed to other memories, and, there would be times in my sleep I'd try to sleep, and I'd hear the floors creak. Sounded as if it was coming closer, and that's when all 9 of my grandfather's dogs started howling and barking. The creaking stopped. Then I heard a breath, a sigh, and the footsteps continued to walk, but this time walking away. This was all before I was 15. When I was 15, 21 now, by the way, I had a nightmare of the house burning down. And as I ran from the house, I could look back and see the shadow hovering over the fire. I woke up in a cold sweat and set the cot in my grandpa's room. At 17 years old, I went to stay for Christmas with my mom. As we woke up, we shared the same bed. My mother went to the bathroom. It has a window overlooking into the Appalachian Mountains, and told me she was humming. Or rather, she heard humming coming from outside the window. Suddenly, the bedroom door shut. Then she told me about dreams of the house burning. This was the last instant until I went to care more recently for my grandfather with dementia and Alzheimer's. He wakes up at around 4 a.m. Sometimes I have to kind of get him to go back to sleep. A week into the first time I cared for him, he woke up around 4 and sat in a rocking chair on the porch. I woke to the sensor lights beaming into my room. So I knew how to get him, and this time, he'd been talking to the empty rocking chair, having a full-blown conversation about how the Confederate flag is mistaken for Southern pride. I grabbed his hand, helped him up, and when a woman's voice, she angrily said, what sounded like to be an inch behind me, "Let him stay, it's cold." There was nobody. Then the dogs all started howling again. I need to return soon to care for him. What am I dealing with here? What did I bring next time? Is this danger? What kind of thing am I experiencing? Other than the narrator's strange, angry woman voice. Is my grandmother communicating with me? First and foremost, I am a believer in most things paranormal and have been for years. I'm a 20-year-old male, and I had an experience tonight with what I believe to be the spirit of my grandmother who passed away. My grandmother, or Mimi as we called her, passed away around 8 to 9 years ago from a sudden heart attack. This devastated my family as I had only known her for a little more than a year after my mom and I moved in with her boyfriend and now my stepdad. She was the kindest person in the world and had never hurt anything in her entire life. She always treated me like I was a born-in member of the family since we moved in. Ever since she passed, I've had experiences that I've not been able to explain. In a way, I always believed that they were coincidences, but I'd always feel this energy or static run through my body anytime I'd stand close to where they happened. I've experienced things on 2 separate occasions. Once when I was a freshman in high school. To break it down into a compact story, I was laying in bed at around 10:45 p.m. Yep, I remember the time. I felt a little depression form in my bed as if somebody was sitting next to me on the edge of my bed. Soon after, scratching and knocking began to happen on the wall behind the headboard. This moment terrified me and I began to pray and tell whatever was causing this to stop. It only made the situation escalate. My bed began to feel like it was shaking and it abruptly stopped. While this happened a long time ago, I had another experience today that I cannot explain. At around 12 a.m., I was laying in bed alone after I had returned home from university and driving 2.5 hours with my fiancé and my parents. We went to a high school football game. I began to hear voices coming from the living room for a couple of minutes, but assumed TV was left on. After checking, no TVs were on and there was definitely no one home, but the voices continued every few seconds. I eventually got up to investigate. Being the believer in the paranormal that I am, I asked a question. Is there anyone here with me? A photo of my Mimi began to move slightly as if someone were turning it around to look at it. In response, I asked, "Is this you, Nan?" The voices began again, but only a female voice was heard, though I couldn't understand what it was saying. A balloon that was standing dead still was tied onto a chair, and I asked, "If this is you, Nan, can you spin this balloon around for me?" Sure enough, the balloon spun around. "Can you stop the balloon for me?" Stopped dead in its tracks. "Are you saying hello? If you are, move the balloon again." The balloon spun around again. "Can you stop the balloon for me?" Again, it stopped dead in its tracks. There was no AC, no windows open in my house, just to mention. The Man in the Fedora Hat for Ghost Skeptics. When my children were 6 and 8 years old, my husband and I had the opportunity to purchase his grandfather's house from the estate. It was a beautiful 1970s rambler in an exclusive neighborhood. His grandparents had a complicated marriage. His grandmother, I'm going to call her Rita, was a true grand lady of education and class. Hal was well liked in his community, but his family members had hard feelings about the way he treated Rita and the kids. The grandparents kept separate bedrooms. Rita had a room on the sunny side of the house, and Rita passed away peacefully in the home. Hal died during surgery a year or so later. As we were doing some remodeling and updating before we moved in, I could smell Rita's trademark lilac scent at the end of the hall by her room. I always felt a calming and peaceful presence in the sunlight in that room. It felt like, well, her safe space. Eventually, the smell and presence went away. This house didn't have a pantry on the main level, but it did have a large pantry off the laundry room in the basement. This wasn't a traditional basement. The house was built on a slope, so the back half of the house had full sunlight. It's not a scary, dark place. Yet, when I would ask the kids to go downstairs to get a can of diced tomatoes or something, they always hesitated. My daughter definitely told me that she was afraid. This continued for the better part of 10 years. They both complained about the pantry feeling sinister. I would sometimes wake up in the master bedroom feeling like I was being watched. In the doorway was a shadow that nearly filled it. It was a tall, slim man in a fedora, just the outline, and this happened many times. In their teen years, the kids wanted more space and privacy and eventually moved to bedrooms downstairs. I thought that was that. My husband and I divorced. He moved across the country. I downsized. Years later, I had my new adult children in the backyard with an adult beverage one evening. We were talking about how none of us believed in ghosts, but there were things that we could not explain. I was talking about the 1917 bungalow I live in now and how certain places kinda, well, for lack of a better term, smell like ghosts. Because the home is in an old part of town, when I first moved in, I sensed almost a ghost highway, like spirits were everywhere. Then I mentioned the man with the fedora hat from their childhood home. Their eyes got big. Both kids had experienced the man in the fedora in the exact same way. Waking up feeling watched to see a tall, slim shadow in the doorway with a fedora hat. We still do not know how to reconcile that with our skepticism. Could I have just picked up a soul and dropped it off? Hello, I'm a bus driver in a small town in England. I think I've just picked up a passenger's soul on my bus. This happened 2 nights ago. I've worked with this bus company for 8.5 years. I've driven the same route for 3 years. Over this time, I've gotten regulars that I get to know as I see them. I usually see them multiple times a day. Some young, some old. Taking them to work or taking them to the shops and, things like bingo. I often jump out to help my older passengers. Maybe help them with the shopping and whatnot. I've had passenger that I've taken for a full 3 years that I've done this route. Let's call her Jane. Jane is an elderly lady who suffers from dementia. She was well functioning for the last 2.5 years. Sometimes a little confused, but I was always patient. Helped her however she needed. I used to pick her up from the bus stop right outside her house. Literally a 10-second walk from her door to the bus stop. I would do it every day. And I'd take her from her house to the local shopping center. This is where she played bingo. Either way, her dementia worsened the last 6 months. After an incident on my bus where she got very confused and distressed, I had to stop my bus to try to settle her down. Someone on the bus knew her son, who thankfully worked close by and came over to help. I told my manager, who understood and approved for my passengers to get off my bus and just get the next one just behind. This way I could stay with Jane. Her son came, calmed her down a bit, got her home and thanked me for the help. We spoke about Jane and I explained how we had been pretty friendly the last few years. I explained that she hadn't freaked out like this before. He said that he knew, and she spoke fondly of me, and that her dementia had worsened, causing her to have bad spells. He took my number and said that maybe we'd get in touch to arrange like a gift for looking after Jane. I insisted it was okay, I didn't need a gift. But he continued to insist. He took my number and his mother and left the bus. I never saw Jane again after that day, but I did see the son at the shops. He explained that Jane had got worse, and unfortunately wasn't safe to leave the house. I thanked him for letting me know and wished her the best. I asked to be kept up to date with her condition as we became friends over the years. This leads to last night. I had been covering the late night shift all week when around 11:30 p.m. I was driving by Jane's house. The bus was completely empty, but as I approached the stop, I thought of Jane, as I normally do. For some reason, however, I had an urge to stop at the bus stop outside her house, as if someone was waiting to board. I could see there wasn't anyone waiting, but the urge was just so strong that I did. I opened the doors, waited for a second. A cold rush of air enters the bus, and I closed the doors and drove on. I could feel a presence on the bus. And about 5 minutes later, maybe 6 stops, I felt someone right next to my cab on the bus, like someone was waiting to get off. I stopped again, opened the doors. I felt the presence leave, and I again continued on, although a bit confused. I fully believe in the paranormal, so when I get a call this morning from Jane's son to tell me that she passed away 2 nights ago in her home around 11 p.m., I broke down. I'd forgotten about the strange feeling I had that night with the presence on my bus until the funeral. I took the day off and attended the funeral for Jane. I did that before going back to the son's house for the wake. The son's house was like a 30-second stop, or rather 30 seconds from the stop I had to let the presence off at. I don't know if this is crazy, and maybe I'm just being stupid, but I think I picked up a presence from right outside Jane's house 30 minutes after she passed. Dropped it off at her son's house. Could I have taken Jane's soul on a final trip to see her son before she passed on to, well, whatever's beyond? I really want to believe I did. So I've comfort in the idea that maybe I just drove her one last time to see her son. One last time. Does anyone else have an experience like this? I hear breathing from my window at night. I'm a 19-year-old guy from Romania. I live in a remote village 14 kilometers from the main road. My village is surrounded on one side by a big pine forest. Since I was a boy, I always felt uneasy around that forest. I would only enter it with my father when we gathered wood. But a year ago, one of my cousins played a prank on me. Tied my dog to a tree at the edge of the forest at dusk. When I saw my dog missing, I went and started searching for him. I started to hear his barks and whimpers at the edge of the forest. I rushed to him and cut him loose. As soon as I did, he ran and whimpered, absolutely terrified. As I was about to follow him back home, I get a feeling of being watched, and it runs down my spine. I try not to give in to it, and as I turn around and walk back home, I just went normally. When my grandmother was alive, she would always tell me about strigoi, a kind of half-ghoul, half-vampire, and also about prikolki, a sort of dog man. I always laughed at her stories, thinking nothing of them. Maybe they were just folk tales to scare children. That night I left my window half open, but still locked because it was hot. And as I was beginning to try to sleep, I hear this dry breathing outside my window. It sounded like an old smoker on their deathbed. As I heard this, a primal fear set inside me and I began sweating and I couldn't move for what felt like ages. But after a minute, adrenaline kicked in, jumped out of bed, closed the window. From that day forward, I never kept my window open at night. I still sometimes hear taps on my wall, too. A reassuring visit from a ghostly in-law. My now husband and I have been quote-unquote dating for several months when this happened. Typically, I'd leave work on Friday afternoon, drive to Vegas from Orange County, California, spend the weekend with him, then drive back home late Sunday evening. The first time we'd had sex, about 6 to 8 weeks prior to this story, had been without protection. Well, you guessed it, I turned up late and worried. Neither of us wanted kids. It was one of the things that clicked for us. While I'm pro-choice, I'm also anti-abortion on a personal level. I'd need a really good reason to do that to myself. And I didn't feel like we just don't want kids was a good enough reason to even think about an abortion. I fretted and I paced, thought about calling him and telling him, but that wasn't really a conversation I wanted to have on the phone. I put it off until the following weekend visit. Except he was in such a good mood. We were having such a good time. I never found the quote-unquote right opportunity to tell him. That Saturday we had sex again, and afterwards he had rolled over and gone to sleep. But sleep was just about the farthest thing from my mind. I was still fretting about the possible pregnancy, thinking that I had to tell him in the morning. I couldn't go another week not telling him. If this was going to drive me crazy, I wanted him along for the ride. So I was sitting on the edge of the bed, listening to him snore, hands clasped together between my knees, head bowed, not praying but close, trying to frame the conversation in my mind. I heard the bedroom door open. I looked up, and this little woman was she sort of stuck her head in the door. She smiled, opened the door wider. She walked into the room. She appeared to be about middle-aged, curly reddish hair, big friendly smile on her face, like it was perfectly normal to be coming into somebody's bedroom in the dead of the night. I was a bit taken aback. Who wouldn't be? I was unsure of what to say. Did his mom have a guest I didn't know about? This woman crossed the sort of space from the door to the bed and sat down next to me. I felt the bed depress. She wore a simple flower-patterned dress. I just stared at her for a moment, blinking. Was about to speak when she patted me on the knee. I felt it, as real as could be. She said, "Don't worry, dear. Everything will be okay." A few tears broke loose and I wiped them away. But when I looked back to her to ask her a question, she was gone. All of a sudden, the strangeness of the situation took hold and I sat up, blinking away tears, looking frantically around the room. What the actual? I expected to be confused and afraid, but instead I felt comforted. I felt better. 100,000 times better. My worry evaporated. I used the restroom, I used the computer for a few minutes. Then I went back to bed and was soon sleeping peacefully. In the morning, I was too bothered by the strange visit to tell Bill about the pregnancy thing. Nor did I tell him about the visit itself. But as he was walking, just sort of walking me to my car, I noticed somebody had put up pictures on the wall in the front hallway. One caught my eye. I backtracked to ask him who she was. That was my grandmother, the one I moved here to take care of. The one who had died 2 years before. When I got back home, I took a pregnancy test. I took it with my best friend there for moral support. It was negative. Woo! My husband and I were married for several years before I told him about the strange event of that night. So I think I have the ghost of a cat lingering around the house. It started around 2 weeks before Halloween. I live with my fiance. We have a single cat. The cat's name is Ryder. We've been living in this rented house for over 2 years now, and minimal paranormal activity. My fiance and I will have our fair share of spiritual run-ins with residual energies, but never in this house. Well, gecko. Well, the first instance happened when I was just doing a few chores, picking up a few things here and there. I heard a very vivid meow from behind me in the room. Turn around, nothing's there. I got to see where Ryder is, and he's dead asleep. I just shrug it off. I just assumed it was my mind playing tricks on me. Second instance, about a week after that, another meow. It sounded like it came from another room. Ryder was in the same room as me, asleep. Okay, maybe it was a stray cat outside. Shrug it off. Either the next day or the day after, I'm in our gaming room just playing on my PC when I feel what I thought to be the tip of Ryder's tail brush against my calf. There's nothing there. The bugger's asleep like 3 feet away from me in his cat tower. At this point, I'm like, we have a friggin' ghost cat. And I tell my fiance, well, they're always one to rationalize first before jumping to, oh my god, ghosties. So they pretty much just shrugged it off as, like an air pressure change or something. Maybe a stray cat was outside. Well, the following week they heard it, told me about it. I feel a bit relieved because now I know it's not just me. Fast forward to today, heard it again, just a single little mew. Fiance wants to check the attic for cats. I know what I heard, I know what I feel. They heard it too. But yeah, babe, sure. Check the attic. The ghost cat activity always happens when our cat is asleep. So I jokingly came up with the conclusion that either Rydell astral projects in his sleep, or we have a ghost cat. Not really sure what to do about it. Well, really I'm not bothered by it and don't necessarily want to get rid of it. Mostly just wanted to share and see if there was anything I could do to make it more comfy. I'm now going to get more comfy and go to sleep. See ya.